Welcome to Wake Up Rise. I'm Edward Collins, and today we're exploring what it really takes to build an unbreakable mindset for the challenges ahead. This conversation is about discipline, emotional control, and resilience in a world that demands more every year. I'm joined by Akira Yamazaki, a former MMA fighter and lifelong practitioner of martial philosophy who brings lessons from combat sports and samurai principles into life, business, and personal growth. Akira, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Edward. It's a pleasure to be here and to share these reflections. Conversations like this matter, especially when people are trying to understand themselves better.
I want to start with something very personal. When people look at fighters, they often imagine physical toughness first, but I've always been curious about what happens internally. You train for months, the fight is set, you step in, and sometimes you lose when that happened to you. How did you deal with it mentally? What was going on in your head after a defeat?
That's a good question, because defeat is never just about the result. For me, everything starts with where I come from. My father is Japanese, born in the post-war period, and he carried with him a very strong cultural foundation. In Japan, there's a concept called Yamato Dameshi, which is the spirit of perseverance, duty, and contribution. His goal was never to raise a champion. His goal was to raise a good human being, someone prepared to serve society and live with integrity. So from a very young age, everything I learned was connected to emotional discipline, not just technique.
That already reframes the whole idea of winning and losing.
Exactly. In that context, defeat isn't the end of the story. In the samurai tradition, there are three mental states that guided warriors. The first is mushin, which means an empty mind. Not empty as in distracted, but empty of noise, fully alert, fully present. The second is zenshin, a state of remaining awareness after the battle. You adjust your helmet. It means the moment has passed, but you stay prepared for what comes next. And the third is fudoshin, the immovable mind.
That idea alone feels incredibly relevant today.
It really is. Fudoshin means not being carried away by extremes. When you win, you don't lose yourself in euphoria because that moment will pass. When you lose, you don't collapse into despair because that moment will also pass. My father taught me this gradually through training, through daily life. So when I lost a fight, yes, there was pain, there was sadness. I invested months of preparation, energy, and belief. It hurts. But after some time, usually days or weeks, I would ask myself, what can I learn from this? Not just technically, but emotionally.
That learning phase seems critical, but also very hard to access when emotions are raw.
It is, and that's why timing matters. You don't force wisdom in the middle of pain. First, you accept the pain. Then when the mind calms down, clarity appears. Resistance only prolongs suffering. Acceptance opens the door to growth.
You're describing something that goes far beyond fighting. Entrepreneurs, professionals, anyone facing public failure can relate to this.
Absolutely. The octagon is just a metaphor. Life is full of unpredictable variables, injuries, sudden changes, setbacks, public losses. If you're not prepared internally, frustration turns into fear. Fear turns into paralysis. But if you train the mind the way you train the body, you stay adaptable.
And that adaptability seems to be the core of what separates people who endure from those who break.
That's right. Everything is training. Every experience prepares you for the next one. The problem is when people believe the war is over and take off their helmet, in reality, life keeps moving. You adjust, you breathe, and you continue.
That image is powerful. Adjust the helmet, stay present, and keep going. I want to explore more about how this mindset was built day by day, especially through your relationship with your father and discipline. But before we go deeper into that, let's pause briefly. If you've made it this far and found this content useful, consider leaving a like. If you want more content like this, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to stay connected with Wake Up Rise. Now let's get back to the conversation. You were just talking about
How discipline, when understood correctly, isn't about punishments, it's stomach preparation. And that's something my father embodied every single day.
You were just talking about discipline, not as punishment, but as preparation. I'd like to stay there for a moment because a lot of people hear the word discipline and immediately associate it with rigidity or suffering. In your case, how was discipline actually presented to you growing up?
Discipline for us was never about control or fear. It was about responsibility. My father used martial arts as a school for life. He didn't train us to fight. He trained us to show up on time, show up tired, show up frustrated, show up even when you didn't feel like it. That consistency slowly builds something inside you. You don't notice it day by day, but over the years, it becomes part of who you are.
Was there ever a moment where you questioned that path, where you thought, maybe this is too much?
Many times, especially as a teenager, we trained early in the morning around 5:30. We studied, we worked, we helped at the academy. There were days when my body was exhausted and my mind wanted excuses. I remember asking my father once if we could move training to a later time so we could rest more. He looked at me calmly and said, "If you don't want to train, you're free to leave, not in a harsh way, just clear,
That kind of clarity is rare.
very rare." And he added something that stayed with me forever. He said, "This training is not about performance, it's about spirit." At first, I didn't understand that. I thought, how can training not be about getting better physically? But what he meant was that performance comes and goes. Spirit is what sustains you when performance drops.
That reframes effort completely.
It does. Anyone can perform well when conditions are perfect, but who are you when you're tired, frustrated, or unmotivated? That's where discipline reveals its true function. It trains your ability to choose what's right over what's comfortable.
And that choice repeated daily becomes identity.
That's true over time. You stop negotiating with yourself. You don't ask, should I do this? You simply do it. That removes a lot of mental noise. And when big challenges appear, your mind is already trained to stay steady.
You mentioned earlier that your father didn't want to raise a champion, but a good human being. How did that influence your decision later to pursue professional fighting?
That's an important point. Martial arts were always a foundation, not a destination. I could have become anything, but I had a strong competitive spirit. When I first watched UFC in the early, something clicked. I felt very clearly this is my path. When I told my father, his first reaction was rejection. He thought it was violent, irresponsible. But after reflecting, he came back and said something very wise. If you're not betraying your principles, then I have to support you. Your happiness is your responsibility, not mine.
That level of trust must have been empowering.
It was, and it came with responsibility. Support doesn't mean comfort, it means accountability. I had to train harder, study more, and remain grounded. That's where mentorship becomes essential.
I want to explore that mentorship aspect. Not everyone has a father like yours do. You believe borrowing someone else's mindset early on is necessary to build an unbreakable one.
In many ways, yes, in Japan, there's a teaching model called Shoot Harai. Shoot is obedience. You follow one teacher completely. You don't question, you absorb. Hai is exploration. You start learning from others, combining perspectives. Right is creation. You develop your own expression. Most people want to jump straight to red without mastering. Sure, that creates confusion.
Because there's no foundation.
That's right. You need structure before freedom, discipline before creativity. Once that base is strong, you're free to evolve, and the process never really ends. You return to Shusha again and again at higher level.
That cyclical nature is fascinating. It removes the illusion of arrival.
There's no final arrival, only refinement, and that understanding protects you from arrogance and despair at the same time.
As you describe this, it feels deeply connected to emotional regulation, staying grounded whether you're praised or criticized.
That's the essence of Fudoshin, emotional balance, not suppressing feelings, but not being ruled by them. Victory and defeat are both teachers if you let them be.
I'd like to go deeper into defeat specifically, especially public defeat, when the world is watching. How do you prevent that moment from defining you?
That's us where acceptance becomes non-negotiable. The moment you resist reality, you suffer twice, once from the event and again from your refusal to accept it. When you accept fully, you free energy to learn and move forward. That's when growth actually begins.
And that lesson, I imagine, didn't come overnight.
No, it came through pain, reflection, and time, and that's something we can explore next, because some of my greatest internal battles happened outside the cage, not inside it.
You just said something that really stayed with me, that some of your greatest battles happened outside the cage, not inside it. I think that's where a lot of people listening will recognize themselves. Could you share one of those moments where the fight was entirely internal?
Yes, and I think this is where the idea of an unbreakable mindset becomes very real. One of the hardest moments of my career wasn't just losing a fight. It was facing situations that felt unfair. There was a period when I was suspended because of a substance that I had taken unknowingly. I declared it honestly. I didn't hide anything. And still, I received a 2-year suspension at that time. The rules were different, much harsher.
That must have felt like a deep injustice.
It did in the beginning. I felt angry, betrayed. I thought I did the right thing, and I'm being punished for it for months. My mind was stuck there. I was resisting reality, fighting a battle that was already over. And while I was resisting, I wasn't growing, I wasn't moving forward.
How did that shift? Because staying in that state can consume someone.
It was a conversation with my brother that changed everything. He looked at me and said, "This already happened. You're suspended. That's a fact. You can either waste these 2 years fighting reality, or you can use them to grow in other areas of your life." That was a wake up call. I realized I was choosing suffering by refusing to accept what was.
Acceptance as an active choice, not resignation.
Indeed, acceptance doesn't mean you agree with what happened. It means you stop bleeding over something you can't change. When I accepted it, my energy shifted. I focused on family, on studying, on developing myself beyond fighting. And when I came back, I was a different person internally.
That idea of resisting versus accepting feels universal. People resist failed projects, broken relationships, missed opportunities.
And resistance traps you in the past. There's a powerful story from Japanese history about a soldier named Hazaro Onotora after World War I ended. He stayed in the jungle for years because he believed the war was still going on. The world had moved on, but he hadn't. When I first heard that story, I realized how many of us are still fighting wars that already ended.
That's a striking metaphor. How many people are stuck in old battles without realizing it?
Exactly. A betrayal, a failure, a criticism from years ago, the event is over. But the mind keeps replaying it. The war only exists in the mind. And that's where suffering comes from.
This connects strongly with presence, being where you are, not where you were.
Presence is everything. That's why practices like breathing are so important. Breathing brings you back to. Now, when you're fully present, fear loses its grip. Fear lives in imagined futures and unresolved past.
You mentioned earlier that many fighters fear not the physical pain, but the psychological consequences, public judgment, failure, rejection.
Yes, physical pain is familiar. We train for that every day. Psychological fear is what paralyzes people. Fear of being humiliated, of not being enough, of losing status. When you bring awareness to that fear and ask, what am I really afraid of? It begins to dissolve.
Almost like shining a light on it.
Yes, awareness transforms fear into information. And once it's information, you can respond instead of react.
This level of self-observation sounds like a skill that takes time to develop.
It does. My wife calls it watching your own movie. You step outside yourself and observe your actions, your motivations. Why am I acting this way? Is this coming from ego, from fear, or from clarity? That observer perspective changes everything.
Because it creates space between stimulus and response.
Yes, and in that space, you regain freedom. That's where true strength lives, not in aggression, but in awareness.
As you talk about this, I can see how your understanding of success must have evolved over time. Early success versus later success often feels different.
Very different. In the beginning of my career. There was lightness, joy, curiosity. I was improving, learning, enjoying the process. Later, when I became champion, success brought pressure. I didn't want to be champion anymore. I needed to be champion. That shift changed my energy completely.
From enjoyment to obligation.
Absolutely. An obligation creates fear of losing, fear of not meeting expectations. That's so well, performance suffers. I only understood this clearly later. Looking back in the moment, it's very hard to see.
That hindsight clarity is something many people struggle to access while they're in the middle of their own story.
And that's why conversations like this matter. They don't eliminate pain, but they shorten the distance between experience and understanding.
You mentioned that shift from enjoying the process to needing the result. And that feels like a turning point, not just in sports, but in life. I see that all the time with entrepreneurs, executives, creators. At first, there's curiosity and passion. Later, everything becomes pressure. How did that realization change the way you approached competition and life afterward?
It changed everything. When I look back, I realized that my best performances came when I was light, when I was curious, when I was simply doing what I loved. I wasn't attached to the outcome. I wanted to win, of course, but my identity wasn't tied to winning. Later on, when I became champion, my identity merged with the belt, with the status, and that's dangerous because anything that can be taken from you will eventually be taken.
That attachment creates fragility.
Yes, people think attachment gives strength, but it actually creates fear. When you need something to prove your worth, you become anxious. You stop flowing. In my case, after losing the belt, I entered a phase where I was chasing confirmation. I needed to prove I was still capable, and that needing drained me.
It's interesting how the word need keeps coming up. Needing recognition, needing results, needing validation.
Because need comes from scarcity, and scarcity creates tension. When you operate from abundance, you act differently. You train, you prepare, you show up, but you're not desperate. Desperation clouds judgment. It tightens the body and the mind.
So in a way, success itself became a test.
Yes, success is one of the biggest tests of character. Failure teaches humility, but success tests awareness when things are going. Well, that said, when the ego sneaks in quietly, you don't notice it at first. You start believing the story about yourself.
And once that story takes over, it's hard to hear anything else.
Very hard. That's why self-observation is so important. Being able to step back and ask, why am I doing this? Am I training because I love the craft or because I'm afraid of losing my image? Those are very different energies.
This makes me think about courage. People often associate courage with fearless action, but what you're describing sounds more like clarity than bravado.
That's true. I don't believe courage is acting despite fear without understanding it. Courage comes from awareness. When you understand your fear, it loses its power. Many people say, just go with fear. I don't fully agree. I think you should pause and ask, what exactly am I afraid of?
And when you ask that question, honestly, what usually comes up?
Most of the time, it's not physical danger. It's psychological fear, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being seen as weak. Once you see that clearly, you realize how little control other people actually have over your life. You're born with nothing, and you can rebuild again if needed.
That perspective alone can be liberating.
It is when you accept that loss as part of the path, fear relaxes, courage then becomes a natural consequence, not an effort.
I want to touch on something very practical. You talked about breathing, presence, awareness. These sound simple, almost too simple, yet people rarely use them. Why do you think that?
Because simplicity doesn't impress the ego. Breathing is free, presence doesn't come with a certificate, so people underestimate it. But breathing is one of the most powerful tools we have when you focus on breathing deeply and consciously. You activate your nervous system in a way that calms the body and clears the mind.
Bringing you back into the present moment.
Indeed, you can't think and feel deeply at the same time. When you feel the breath, the mind quiets. That's why fighters, monks, and even modern neuroscientists all talk about breath. It grounds you.
And presence seems to be the common thread here, whether it's fighting business or relationship.
Presence transforms everything. If you drink a glass of water with full attention, that moment becomes complete. You're not rushing to the next thing. Life stops being a means to an end and becomes meaningful in itself.
That is a radical idea in a world obsessed with speed and outcome.
It is, but without presence, you're never actually living. You're just chasing.
As you say this, I'm thinking about your role now as a father and mentor. How do you pass these ideas on to your children, especially in such a competitive environment?
That's one of my biggest responsibilities today. My children train. They compete, and I constantly remind them, one good training session doesn't define you, and one bad one doesn't either. You don't get carried away by success, and you don't collapse in difficulty. You adjust your helmet and move forward.
That metaphor keeps coming back.
Because it's not timeless. Life is a sequence of moments. Each one asks for presence, not attachment. When you understand that, the mindset becomes truly unbreakable.
I feel like this naturally leads us into how people can apply these principles outside of sports, especially in careers and business. Because most people listening aren't stepping into an octagon, but they are stepping into pressure every day.
And the principles are exactly the same. The arena changes, but the inner battle doesn't.
That essay, powerful point. The arena changes, but the inner battle stays the same. Let's take this into the world of work, business, and everyday pressure. When you look at entrepreneurs, executives, people trying to build something what do you see as the biggest mental trap they fall in?
The biggest trap is living in constant anticipation. People are always ahead of themselves. They're thinking about the next quarter, the next deal, the next recognition. And while planning is important, living mentally in the future creates anxiety. You stop being effective in the only place where actually happens, which is now.
It's almost like they're never fully where they are.
Exactly. They wake up already tired, not because of physical effort, but because their mind never rests. They carry yesterday's problems and tomorrow's fears at the same time. That is sustainable in fighting. If your mind is not in the present, you get hit in business. The hit comes later, but it's just as real.
Burnout, bad decisions, broken relationship.
Yes, and people often think the solution is more information, another book, another course, another strategy. But most of the time, what's missing is not knowledge, it's that clarity. Clarity comes from slowing down and observing.
Observing yourself, like you mentioned earlier, watching your own movie.
That's right. When you look at yourself from the outside, you start to see patterns. You notice when you're acting from fear instead of purpose. You notice when your decisions are driven by ego instead of values. That awareness alone already changes behavior.
Many people avoid that observation because they're afraid of what they might see.
That's true. Self-observation requires honesty, and honesty can be uncomfortable, but avoiding it doesn't make the truth disappear. It just delays growth. In martial arts, if your stance is wrong, your teacher corrects you immediately. In life, we often go years without correction because we don't look closely enough.
There's also this culture of constant comparison, especially now.
Comparison is poison. When you compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 10, you create unnecessary suffering. Everyone has a different path, a different rhythm. When I was fighting, people would tell me, you should already be fighting for the title, but I trusted my timing. I wanted to arrive prepared, not rushed.
That patience seems increasingly rare.
Because patience doesn't produce immediate applause, but patience builds depth, and depth is what sustains you when trends change and external validation disappears.
How do you personally define success today after everything you've lived?
Success today means alignment. Alignment between what I think, what I say, and what I do. If those three are in harmony, I feel at peace regardless of external results, titles, money, recognition. They come and go, alignment state.
That's a very different definition from what most people are taught.
It is, but it's also much more stable. When your success depends on things you can't control, you're always vulnerable. When it depends on how you live and act, it's yours.
There's a strong ethical dimension in what you're saying, almost a moral discipline.
Discipline without ethics is empty, and ethics without discipline is weak. They need each other. My father always said that strength without character is dangerous. And I've seen that many times, both in sports and in business.
When people hear unbreakable mindset, they often imagine toughness, hardness, but what you're describing sounds softer yet stronger.
That's a good observation. An unbreakable mindset isn't rigid. It's flexible. It adapts. It bends without breaking. Rigidity snaps under pressure. Flexibility absorbs impact.
Like in martial art?
Yes, the principles are the same. If you're tense, you get hurt. If you're relaxed and present, you respond naturally. Life works the same way.
For someone listening right now who feels overwhelmed, pressured, maybe even stuck in a loop of fear or expectation, where would you suggest they start?
Start small, very small. Start by paying attention to one breath, then one action. Eat one meal with presence. Have one honest conversation. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. Consistency in small things changes the direction of your life over time.
That removes the pressure of transformation.
That's when right transformation is not an event. It's a process, and processes require patience and kindness toward yourself.
I feel like this leads us naturally into something deeper, meaning and purpose, because once performance and pressure are reframed, the question becomes, why am I doing all this in the first place?
And that question is at the heart of everything.
That question really is at the center of it all. Once people slow down and stop living only for performance, they often realize they've never clearly defined their purpose in your own journey. How did your sense of purpose evolve over time?
Purpose for me changed as I matured. Early on, my purpose was very concrete. I wanted to compete, to test myself, to see how far I could go physically and mentally. That's a valid purpose, especially when you're young. But later, I realized that competition was just the surface. Underneath it, there was something deeper, self-mastery.
Mastery of yourself, not just of the sport.
Absolutely, fighting was the tool that forced me to face fear, ego, discipline, patience, humility over time. I understood that those lessons mattered more than the victories themselves. When I stopped fighting professionally, that purpose didn't disappear. It simply changed form.
And an important point, because many people attach their identity to a role. When that role ends, they feel lost.
That's very common. If your identities, I am my job or I am my title, you're in danger. Roles change, bodies age, circumstances shift. If your sense of self is tied only to external functions, suffering is inevitable. Purpose needs to be internal enough to survive change.
How does someone build that kind of internal purpose?
By asking honest questions and by being willing to listen to uncomfortable answers. Questions like, what values do I want to embody? How do I want it to treat people? What kind of presence do I bring into a room? Those things remain relevant no matter what you do professionally.
That reframes success as a way of being, not just achieving.
Yes, achievements are expressions, not foundations. When people confuse the two, they burn out or feel empty, even when they win. I've met many successful people who are deeply unhappy because they reached goals that were never truly aligned with them.
That's something we don't talk about enough.
Because it challenges the narrative that more is always better. Sometimes less is more clarity, less noise, less comparison. When you reduce external pressure, your internal compass becomes stronger.
You've mentioned spirituality a few times, but always in a grounded way. How does spirituality fit into this mindset without becoming abstract or detached from reality?
For me, spirituality is very practical. It's not about beliefs alone. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing that there's something larger than your ego operating through you when you're fully present. When I fought in a state of calm and clarity, it felt like action happened through me, not from me.
Almost like getting out of your own way.
That's true when you're obsessed with controlling outcomes, you block that flow. When you trust your preparation and stay present, things unfold naturally. That's true in sports, in business, and in relationships.
That trust seems difficult for people who are used to controlling everything.
Control is often a response to fear. We try to control because we don't trust uncertainty, but uncertainty is unavoidable. The question is not how to eliminate it, but how to coexist with it peacefully.
And that requires humility.
Very much so. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less when your focus shifts outward. You suffer less internally.
I'm thinking about leaders listening to this, people responsible for teams, families, organizations. How does this mindset influence leadership?
Leadership starts with self-leadership. If you can't regulate your emotions, your fears, your ego, you'll project them onto others. A calm leader creates calm environments. A reactive leader creates chaos. People don't follow words, they follow presence.
Presence as a form of authority.
Yes, when someone is centered, you feel that you trust them more, even if they speak less.
That's the kind of leadership that lasts.
It's interesting how all these threads come back to the same core ideas: awareness, acceptance, presence.
Because their fundamental techniques, change tools evolve, but the human mind hasn't changed that much. We still struggle with fear, desire, and identity in the same way.
As we move toward the final part of this conversation, I'd like to bring this into something very practical and forward-looking. Is right around the corner for many people listening. They're thinking about goals, plans, resolutions based on everything we've discussed. What would you say truly separates those who thrive from those who remain stuck?
It comes down to one thing: whether you're living consciously or unconsciously. Conscious people respond, unconscious people react, and that difference changes everything over time.
That distinction between responding and reacting feels like a line in the sand. As we get closer to wrapping this journey, I'd like to make it very concrete. When you look at people planning for setting goals, writing resolutions, what mistakes do you see repeating year after year?
The biggest mistake is trying to change results without changing identity. People say, this year, I'll earn more, I'll be calmer, I'll be successful, but they don't ask who they need to become to sustain those results without inner change, external change. Never lasts.
So they chase outcomes instead of transformation.
Exactly. They focus on what they want, not on how they live daily, but your future is built by your habits, your reactions, your inner dialogue. If those don't change, the calendar turning doesn't change anything either.
That explains why so many resolutions fade by February.
Because they're fueled by motivation, not structure. Motivation is emotional and temporary. Structure is quiet and consistent. In martial arts, you don't wait to feel motivated to train. You train because that's who you are.
Identity again.
Always identity. When you say, I am the kind of person who shows up, behavior follows naturally. When you say, I'll try, you're already creating an escape room.
That's uncomfortable, but very honest.
Growth is uncomfortable by nature. Comfort is static. Life is dynamic. When people try to stay comfortable while demanding growth, they create internal conflict.
There's also a lot of pressure around speed. People feel late behind, outdated.
Speed without direction leads nowhere. Everyone is running, but few know where they're going. When you slow down enough to choose direction consciously, you actually move faster in the long run.
That's counterintuitive in today's culture.
True, but depth
beats speed over time. Someone who moves slowly but consistently will surpass someone who sprints and collapses. I've seen that in fighting and in life.
If someone listening feels they've wasted years or made wrong choices, what would you tell them?
I tell them that awareness makes time irrelevant. The moment you see clearly, the past loses its power. There is no such thing as being late in life. There is only being unconscious or conscious.
That removes a lot of shame.
Shame is one of the biggest obstacles to change. People don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they're trapped in self-judgment. Compassion towards yourself is not weakness, it's fuel.
That's something high performers often struggle with.
Because they confuse self-criticism with discipline. Discipline doesn't require cruelty. You can be firm and kind at the same time.
If you had to summarize not in slogans but in lived advice, what daily practice would you recommend to cultivate this unbreakable mindset?
I would say this. Every day, pause at least once and observe yourself. Observe your thoughts, your reactions, your intentions. Ask, is this coming from fear or clarity? That single question repeated daily changes a life.
It's simple but not easy.
That's sense, right? Simple doesn't mean shallow. Simple means essential.
As we approach the final stretch of this conversation, I feel there's one last piece we haven't fully touched. Legacy, not in terms of fame, but in terms of impact. What remains after the fights, the titles, the career?
What remains is how you made people feel, how you lived your values, and whether you helped others see themselves more clearly. Everything else fades.
That feels like a perfect bridge into closing this conversation thoughtfully without rushing it.
I agree. Some reflections deserve to land gently.
You said something important just now, that what remains is how you made people feel and whether you helped them see themselves more clearly. When you look at your own journey today, beyond titles and fights, what do you hope people take from your story?
I hope they understand that strength is not about domination or perfection. It's about sincerity with yourself, about facing your fears without running from them and without pretending they don't exist. If people see that it's possible to live with discipline and at the same time with humanity, then my journey has meaning.
There's a lot of peace in the way you talk about this now.
Because peace comes from acceptance. I don't need to prove anything anymore. I've made mistakes. I've had victories. I've had losses. All of that shaped me. When you stop fighting your own story, you finally rest.
For someone listening who feels tired of fighting themselves, what would you say as a final encouragement?
I would say be patient with yourself. Life is not asking you to be extraordinary every day. It's asking you to be present. If you show up honestly today, tomorrow takes care of itself. The unbreakable mindset is not about never falling, but about always returning to yourself.
That's a powerful way to frame it. Akira, I want to thank you for your generosity, your clarity, and the depth you brought to this conversation. I know this will resonate with a lot of people who are searching for something more solid than motivation.
Thank you, Edward. I truly appreciate the space you created here. Conversations like this help all of us reflect, including me. I'd be very happy to continue this dialogue again in the future.
And to everyone who stayed with us until the end, thank you for your time and attention. It's been a privilege to share this moment with you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that this content makes a difference in your life. If you'd like to suggest other topics for the channel or share what you thought about this episode, feel free to leave a comment. Until next time.